Hello, and welcome to the episode of My Two Cents. My name is Paul Emerson, and I will be giving you my 2 cents. Today's topic is uh, part two of Terrence Terrence Hart because it's trending. I don't know if you've seen yet, but Terrence Howard is on Joe Rogan, and they're talking about his the science that he's creating, and everything he's saying is pretty on point when it comes to his premises are valid. He has to prove the science that he's speaking on, and that's going to be challenging in a system that has already been structured a certain way. There's one thing that me and Terrence Howard agrees that we both agree on, and it comes down to the whole reason why I even started my 2 cent, which is the reason why I'm speaking on this subject, is that the force of electricity is an attractive force. Electrons are attracted to each other. That is the fundamental premise that I built my 2 cents. The whole reason why I even started my 2 cent, and the reason why I wanted to have a intellectual discussion about the nature of reality and science and philosophy in general, is that we are told that the subatomic world is based on the particle physics of atomic structure. The atoms are said to be infinitely small points and particles with wave functions. So that is the dynamic of the universe. That is the way that science is describing. That is the way science is. That is the fundamental foundation of empirical science for modern society. Particles and waves. Smallest units of what we define as physical matter are particles. Their interactions are waves. We are told that the hydrogen atom is the single simplest particle, and that in hydrogen atom, I'm sitting in my car and it's like super hot, as you can see. we're told that um, we're told that the simplest atom is a hydrogen atom. A hydrogen atom consists of a proton and an electron. A proton by itself is not called hydrogen, right? These are the fundamental um, these are the fundamental discrepancies in our science that no one questions, right? If the smallest unit of matter is hydrogen, and a hydrogen atom is literally just a proton by itself. A proton by itself in isolation is an isotope of hydrogen. I'm sorry, a proton by itself is a hydrogen ion, right? Because if an atom has too many or not enough electrons, it's going to be positive. It's going to be a positive or a negative ion in chemistry. So if a proton doesn't have an electron around it, then we would call it a hydrogen ion. That's what we should call it. But we don't consider the fact that maybe instead of calling hydrogen, we should just call it proton, right? It should just be proton. But I digress. A proton and an electron together gives you the hydrogen atom. Okay. Everybody that has ever played with a magnet knows that magnets attract each other, and anyone that's ever really played with a magnet and paid attention knows that the force of attraction between a magnet increases exponentially in relation to the distance halved and squared. So the closer two magnets are, so the the charge of any given magnet has a quantity that can be defined as finite, right? The closer two magnets come to each other, the greater the attractive force between them, without the charge of the magnet itself ever actually increasing in power. So this is a universal understood. This is what Coulomb's law describes in its fundamental principles. That the distance between any two charges is twice as strong, with the force itself being a constant. Right. So if this is what we observe directly, this isn't something that you have to mathematically figure out. If this is something that we observe directly, and we state that the proton has a positive charge, the electron has a negative charge, why is the universe stable? Why is the universe stable? because the electron being attracted to the proton, they should collide. The forces between them should be infinite, and there should be no stable orbit around which an electron that is free flowing, right? We say that electricity is free flowing electrons. So if you have a copper wire that is made of trillions of electrons, and I get it, matter is 99.9% empty space. I get that. If the electron is attracted to the proton, and you okay, let's say it this way. Take the distance from any power plant to any load bearing house, right? A single electron travels through space at the speed of light from that power plant to your house and never collides into a proton. What is the statistical probability if there are literally more electrons in that wire than there probably are stars in our galaxy? What is the statistical probability that the electron flowing through that wire would never collide into a proton? Never collide into the atomic nucleus of an atom. What is the probability if the electrons are attracted to the atom? Because the whole reason why the electrons are moving through the atom is because of the positive and negative, um, the ionization of the electric wire, the copper wire, from the load to the source. That's how electricity flows. You create a greater load at the power plant, and the wires are neutral, but the potential is so much higher in the power plant that the extra energy is discharged into the neutral copper wire. And since there's nowhere for those electrons to go, they can't fit anywhere in the wire. They just travel to whatever the load is. And the load is your TV. Your TV works because it's in a state of imbalanced electrons. The electronics are not balanced. They have a negative they have a negative state. So they need those electrons to flow into them to give them a positive state. When they're powered on, they are in equilibrium. But since the energy radiates as heat, it stays in a constant state of needing more and more energy and more electricity. This is just basics of how physics works. So, understanding all of that, I couldn't come to any justifiable reason as to why an electron does not spiral into the atomic nucleus of an atom and collide with the protons the same way two magnets slam together. I know that there is a justification, but the justification doesn't really match empirical evidence. I know that they wrote up a bunch of stuff and they came up with a bunch of information after I asked the question, but when I was asking the question, the information wasn't there. There wasn't even any back in the early 90s and 2000s when I was asking this question. They didn't even have an answer for how hydrogen atoms and helium atoms they didn't have an answer for how hydrogen combined to form helium because you didn't have a neutron. They didn't even know where the neutrons were coming from. Where did the neutrons come from? The first element is hydrogen with a single proton. The next element is helium with two protons and two neutrons. They knew that helium had two protons because the spectral analysis of helium in the sun showed this element has two protons. But when they measured helium, they're like, why is it 4 times heavier than hydrogen? How can something that's only twice the spectral analysis of a hydrogen be 4 times heavier than hydrogen? Because neutrons don't interact with the electromagnetic spectrum. So when you analyze it with the spectrometer, you couldn't see the neutrons, right? And they understood that lithium and all the other elements were exponentially greater or heavier in some way without having to know or infer that there's neutrons. So it's like, why is it 4 times heavier? And if it's 4 times heavier, where are the other elements in between there? Where is the second and a third element? Because you go hydrogen, helium, lithium. You go 1, 4, 6. Not one, wait, 1, 4, yeah, 1, 4, 6. There's not one hydrogen element. There's not one hydrogen atom with 0 neutrons, and then 2 hydrogen atom with 2 hydrogen neutrons, and then 3 hydrogen atoms with hydrogen neutrons. That's where lithium should be, right? Lithium is three hydrogen atoms. I'm sorry, lithium is three protons, three neutrons. That's where lithium should be. And helium is two protons and two neutrons, right? But hydrogen is just one proton, no neutrons. So from the jump of 1 to 4, and I know it sounds weird, but this is what they're saying. Hydrogen has a mass of 1, helium has a mass of 4, lithium has a mass of 6. So from 1 to 4 are all different isotopes of hydrogen. But they can't explain where these isotopes come from. They, at least not at the time that I was asking the questions that I was asking. So you go 1, 4, 6. Okay, 1, 4, 6. So you go from 4 to 6. Well, where's 5? Where's 3? Where's 2? Because hydrogen's supposed to be 2, but it's not 2, it's 4. That's where the confusion comes in. The first element is hydrogen, which is 1 proton. And let's make it an isotope. It's 1 proton, 1 neutron. The second element is helium, but it's 4 times heavier than hydrogen. It's twice it's twice the mass of a hydrogen isotope, but they don't consider a hydrogen isotope as the first element. They're teaching you that the first element is just a hydrogen atom, it's just a proton and an electron. And they're saying that the second element is 2 protons, 2 neutrons. So how did we get from one entity to 4 entities, right? So when you see how someone like Terrence Howard saying that the math, the physics is wrong and 1 times 1 equals 2, you can't really debate him based on conventional science, because the conventional information that we're being given is already flawed, right? That's why listening to Terrence and understanding the principles of understanding the principles and the premise of the axioms and the postulates of math, he is not incorrect. He's not incorrect. You can listen to what he's saying. We were not taught anything in school. We were told what was right and what was wrong. If you reflect on when you were in elementary school, you were not given proofs for mathematical principles. You were told that this is what this was. This is the number 1. Say 1. 1. This is the number 2. Say 2. 2. This is the number 3. Say 3. 3. Repeat all of the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's how we were taught things in school. We wasn't told that 1 is the relationship between the real number system, and that these are integers, and that integers are also whole numbers, and whole numbers are also. We wasn't given any of that information in elementary school. We were told this is the number 1. This is this is addition. This is subtraction. This is multiplication. This is division. These are the things we were told. And then every year we added some other principle on top of the last principle without question. Memorize this operation. Do it this way. Don't deviate from doing it this way. And if you asked a question, you were told not to question. You wasn't given an answer. You were just told don't question it. If you don't understand, it's not my problem that you don't understand. Just go home and do your homework, right? So you can say that Terrence Howard is wrong because you know that 1 times 1 equals 1. Terrence Howard isn't telling you that 1 times 1 equals 1. He's giving you a proof. And if you follow his proof, he's just simply incorrect. His proof doesn't prove itself. His proof doesn't prove itself. And the reason why his proof doesn't prove itself is because 2 times 2 equals 4. If you have 2 objects and you place each one of those objects into 2 different places, because, okay, you have numbers which represent objects, and you have real numbers, which is based on the Mitusan ruler, the Mitusan number line. Real numbers represent spatial coordinates, right? Nowhere in the universe does there exist a location of 0, right? And this is what I mean. The area of a square is one side n times side n. And side n has to be some value, because there's no such thing as no location in space, not empirically, right? We can abstract that there is such a condition as 0 dimensions, but you're never going to find an absolute zero location anywhere in the universe. You can assign zero as a coordinate to a location, right? The address of the store that I work at could be zero, but the location of the store is somewhere on Earth. It's in some space. It exists somewhere, right? So mathematically, there's never ever any such thing as a zero dimensionality or a zero location or nowhere. Nowhere, no when, no how, nothingness don't empirically exist inside of existence. That's why I made the video existence is outside of existence is inside of non-existence, as it is the boundary beyond the infinity of what exists. Because if existence is finite, because it has to be finite, eventually you start running out of existence. And if you run out of existence, at the very edge of existence would be non-existence. Everything that is going to compound and compress into itself, fill the volume. But if you try to fill an empty nothing, if you try to fill an infinite volume with finite entities, then you're going to have, you can't fill an infinite volume with a, you can't fill infinite volume with finite entities. And by the nature of an entity, it has to be finite. Things that exist have to be finite, even if they are infinite. There's always a bigger infinity. Infinity times infinity should give you what? Infinity squared, right? And this is kind of like what Terrence is pointing to. So if I have two of something, right, and I put those two things in two separate locations, I have square A and square B. And inside of square A and inside of square B, I have two entities. These two entities exist in this box, and these two entities exist in this box. I have four entities. So two entities plus two entities equals four, and two entities times two locations also equals four. This is the this is how an actual axiom and an actual proof work. You have to have non-contradictory values that you can show them to be true, and you can use them against each other to validate the position that you're making. This is how you do actual science. So Terrence is saying that if I have one entity and I have one location, one entity by one location equals two entities or two locations. And that's not how life works, right? If I have $1 and I times my $1 by one bank account, how much money do I have? If you have $1 and you times your $1 by one bank account, how much money do you have? The answer is still one, right? You don't get two. You can't make something from nothing. Second law of thermodynamics. I know that the science that we have might be a little bit flawed, but the second law of thermodynamics, you can't get more from less. You just can't. Because remember, Coulomb's law shows you that there is a relationship with the force based on the distance of two magnets. But it doesn't change the fact that the power of the magnets are constant. It just, the relationship of how they work is exponentially greater the closer you are to those two magnets. The force of gravity of Jupiter and Mars and Earth is the same. It's constant. But as Earth approaches Jupiter, the gravitational force of Jupiter on Earth increases exponentially. Why? I don't know. I don't know why. But I can show it to be true. Is that a violation of second law of thermodynamics? It would be if it wasn't a universal constant. Since it's a universal constant, no, it's not a violation. Because the same way that the mass of Jupiter working on Earth causes an exponential increase in inverse acceleration, as Earth accelerates to Jupiter, there's an equal and opposite reaction of heat energy and electrostatic there's moons that orbit around Jupiter that send electrical volts to Jupiter, because the relationship of Jupiter and all the energy of Jupiter, that energy has to be, it's so much kinetic potential that it has to discharge to the planet, because the relationship of its orbit is such that the electromagnetic pull of the planet isn't great enough to allow it to collide with Jupiter because it's in orbit. So the electrons just fly toward the planet as a giant electric bolt of lightning, because it might be, even though we don't understand the physics understands itself and does what it's supposed to do. So So when you watch him say that 1 times 1 equals 2, I don't agree, because the premise of 1 times 1, the premise of multiplication taken as it is what it is. So I don't agree that 1 times 1 equals 2. But I do think that Terrence Howard is not incorrect. Well, I think that the premise is incorrect, or it's poorly stated, and he could work on his language for his premise and his postulate. But I recognize that the foundation of the math that we currently have is also just as inherently flawed and broken. I think that if Terrence Howard was actually using calculus instead of using elementary arithmetic, he could better illustrate what it is he's trying to say with more accuracy. But since he's focusing on trying to make it as simple as possible, he's losing something. Because 1 times 1 is, after listening to Terrence, 1 times 1 does not equal 1. 1 times 1 is undefined. You shouldn't even ask that question. If you have a box with one thing in it and you try to multiply it by something else, you can't. You just can't. Because you have to have that spatial. To do a multiplication problem, you have to have an entity, and you have to have the set, because it's set theory. You have to have the entity by that many numbers, right? I got 10 people and each one of them want a car. So how many cars do I need? 10 people times one car gives me 10 cars. I've got a family of 4 and they all want 10 cars and they all want one car. How many cars do they need? The family is still 1, even though there's 4 people in the family. So 10 families, which is 1, times 1 car still gives you 10. But the car can fit all 4 people. So how many people in total are in the car? 40. Because the family is divided into 4. So the family is 1 divided by 4. So those 4 individuals times the 10 families gives you a quantity of 40. And all 40 of those people can fit in each individual 4-seater car. So you still have 10 families and 10 cars, and it still totals 40 people. That's the way the axioms are supposed to work. That's the way multiplication is supposed to actually be applied. And if you do it that way, and if you do it correctly, then you'll see the reality of what it is that you're trying to convey. So you can't take me, I can't take myself and multiply myself against myself and raise myself by anything other than 1. Because there's only 1 of me, and I'm only in one location. I'm already in the location that you're asking me to be in. So when you say, Paul, how many of you are in the location that you're at? It's just 1. So it's undefined. You can't define it mathematically, because you can't raise you can't raise an entity by itself without it being the square or the cube. That's why he says 1 times 1 equals 1. What he's ultimately saying is 1 times 1 equals square root. What he's saying is 1 times 1 equals squared. The way a cube is squared, that's what he's saying. He's saying if you have an entity, if you have a square, and you want to understand the relationship or the nature of that square, you have to square it to find this dynamic, to find this relationship. It's a valid point, but it's poorly spoken. It's poorly written. So, I guess that's it. I can rant and rave and rumble on and continue to say all of the things that I need to say, but I think I'm pretty much done with that. I'm just killing time before I have to go back to work, before I go back to college. So, as always, I lost my keys. As always, my name is Paul Emerson, and I have given you my 2 cents.